Welcome back to Combat Mission Fortress Italy, where we are going to take a look at Italian infantry battalions, what they're armed with, how they're organised, and the tactical significance of all those details. There are some very important caveats to bear in mind here. Firstly, the Italian army as modelled in CMFI represents the defenders on Sicily during the Allied invasion in July 1943. After July, Italy surrenders to the Allies and the faction is no longer available in-game. So we're looking at a very specific slice of the Italian Royal Army in a very specific, very limited time frame. The defenders of Sicily do not represent the best troops that Italy had available. Many of these had already become casualties or Allied prisoners in the North African theatre, which had just closed with the defeat of Axis forces in Tunisia, or they are reconstituting after that defeat on the mainland. But, although some Italian units performed very well in the desert, the Italian Royal Army as a whole can be characterised as inferior in arms, equipment and organisation when compared to the Allies. This is especially apparent when we look at the infantry battalions. Starting with the individual riflemen, we have a soldier armed with the Carcano Modello 1891 infantry rifle. This is a bolt-action weapon chambered for 6.5 by 52mm Carcano. It feeds from a 6-round integral box magazine reloaded by on-block clips. In combat mission terms, this is very comparable to other bolt-action rifles like the Kar98K and the Mosin Nagant, able to reach out to 500 meters with the usual caveats about small arms effectiveness dropping off with range. Also down at squad level, we have the Breda M30 light machine gun. This is chambered in 6x5 by 52 Carcano like the rifle, so we have ammo compatibility, but that's about it for the good news. The Breda has an integral 20-round box magazine which flips out to be reloaded by stripper clips. Although the rate of fire is quite low, it's still enough to necessitate the kind of frequent reloading that makes it difficult to sustain effective fire. In some respects, it might be better to think of it as more of an automatic rifle like the BAR than a light machine gun like the Bren gun. Rarely seen, but still possible to find down at squad level, is the Beretta M38 submachine gun. This was a very popular weapon on both sides of the war for those who could get their hands on it. The M38 fires 9mm Parabellum from box magazines. These appear to be the 40-round versions in CMFI, and although the Takei will fire out past 200 meters, it's a submachine gun, the closer the better. For the Italian Infantry Battalion, it's very obviously not a standard issue weapon. It's not impossible to find, but troops of all ranks are generally armed with rifles or pistols. Speaking of pistols, finally, we have the Beretta M1934. This is carried by officers and as a backup weapon for machine gunners. It's chambered in .380, and if your troops are actually using it, you've gone wrong somewhere. This lineup of weapons isn't all that dissimilar to that of other forces. The British section, for example, is also predominantly armed with bolt-action rifles, with a light machine gun and a submachine gun thrown in. Things start to get weird though when we look at squad organisation and how these weapons are distributed. Italian squads are 20 men strong. This is too big to fit into the combat mission UI, so in game they're split into a HQ and 2 groups. In command we have a squad HQ, consisting of the squad leader, armed with a Carcano and some binoculars, plus a single rifleman. Then we have the squad's first group, made up of 9 men, a leader, 2 light machine gunners with Bredas, and 7 riflemen. The second group also consists of 9 men, 2 of these being the group leader and his assistant. There are no special weapons here unless an M38 creeps in, everybody has a rifle. The 2 groups are each made up of 2 teams, but these can't be split. The 9-man groups cannot be subdivided, and they can't detach smaller elements. You are stuck with 9-man blocks. This is an immediate tactical problem. Not being able to split the groups down means they can't disperse, which makes them very vulnerable to enemy fire, and especially indirect fire. It means that the group is the smallest manoeuvre unit, and you can't, for example, send a 2-man scout team forward to prove a path. You have to send 9 men, and hope the enemy isn't waiting for them. The 2 groups taken together do fit into the classic fire element plus assault element archetype. Group 1 with the LMGs provides covering fire for Group 2 to advance and destroy the enemy. but the lack of flexibility you get from being unable to break the groups down further inevitably makes this very clunky. If Group 1 alone cannot suppress the enemy, Group 2 cannot subdivide to reinforce the base of fire and continue moving forward. Avenues of approach and base of fire positions become limited by the need to find cover and concealment for 9-man groups, not the 3 to 5-man teams that other forces can break down into. So although Italian infantry squads have mass, they have a lot of bodies, this is not necessarily an advantage, and in fact in a lot of situations can actually be a severe disadvantage. There are 2 of these squads per platoon, led by a 2-man platoon HQ. The platoon leader is armed with a pistol and a hat that says "I am important, shoot me first," and he's backed up by a standard rifleman. The platoon leader does have some binoculars, but he doesn't have access to a radio. Here we have another constraining feature. If the platoon HQ is to remain within voice and visual C2 contact of the 2 squad HQs, the whole platoon needs to remain pretty compact. Again, we have a constraint on the Italian ability to disperse and a limit of their flexibility, both of which can have serious tactical consequences. There are 3 of these platoons per company, all commanded by a company HQ team. This is led by the company CO and his XO, both armed with pistols and filled out with 4 more riflemen. Again, we have a command and control level that does not have a radio. We are also very conspicuously maintaining the Italians' low level of firepower. We're all the way up to company level with a total of 132 men, and we are still essentially limited to bolt-action rifles and subpar LMGs. Most other company-level TOEs in this period include some supporting weapons. Our Italian company has no medium machine guns, light or medium mortars, they don't even reliably have any submachine guns, and critically they don't have any anti-tank weapons or any radios that would allow them to call for fire. There are 3 of these companies in the Italian Infantry Battalion. They are led by a battalion HQ team with the battalion leader and an assistant armed with pistols backed up by 2 riflemen. His executive officer leads an identical team. To support the infantry companies, the battalion has 2 more sub-formations. The first of these is a recon platoon. This is made up of 3 squads, each of 13 riflemen, led by the standard 2-man platoon HQ. Again, we have no radio. The squads still cannot be split, making them even less wieldy than the infantry squad groups. They seem slightly more likely to have a few Beretta M38 SMGs to hand, but they don't have any Breda M30 LMGs at all. They are basically large groups of riflemen. The inability to break down into teams somewhat necessitates a more direct approach to reconnaissance. Obviously it's a lot harder to exploit cover and concealment with a 13-man blob than it is with a series of small dispersed teams, so this really seems like a go forward and see if you get shot kind of recon platoon. It should be pretty obvious that this is frequently a suboptimal approach. The 2nd battalion level element is a support company, where we finally have some heavier weapons. The company itself is commanded by a 6-man HQ team with 2 pistol-armed officers, 4 riflemen, and again, no radio. Underneath them are 2 heavy machine gun platoons and 2 light mortar platoons. The HMG is the tripod-mounted Breda Modello 37, which fires 8x59mm RB Breda. It's not belt-fed, it's fed with rigid feed clips. In reality, these can fit 20 rounds. In CMFI, the MG can fire 40 before it needs to reload. This might be a bit of an abstraction to represent a quick reload by the loader, but the combination of even 40 rounds with a relatively sedate 500 rounds per minute maximum rate of fire means that the Breda M37 isn't kicking out the level of firepower of something like a Vickers or an M1919. It can fire out to 1,000 meters thanks to the tripod, but that's only going to be effective against area targets. There are 5 men in the weapons team, a rifle-armed leader with binoculars, the gunner and 3 riflemen. Between them they carry 840 rounds of 8mm for the MG. They're also backed up by an ammo bearer team of 4 riflemen carrying an additional 800 rounds. The gun team and the ammo bearers make up a single squad. There are 2 squads to a section led by a single rifle-armed section HQ. There are 2 sections in a platoon led by a 2-man HQ team and 2 platoons in the support company for a total of 8 machine guns. The light mortar is the Brixia Model 35. This is a really interesting design for a mortar. Although the bombs are muzzle-loaded by hand, they're actually propelled by blank cartridges fed from a 10-round clip and activated by a trigger. So to some extent in operation, it's a bit more like a rifle grenade than a conventional mortar, and the system allows a relatively rapid rate of fire, so it could also be seen as a kind of primitive proto-GMG. It fires 45mm bombs. In Fortress Italy, only high explosive ammunition is carried, and this is where the Brixia falls a bit short. 45mm mortar bombs are just not big enough to be effective in this time period. They have a very small radius of effect that the accuracy and rate of fire of the weapon aren't really enough to compensate for. It's a relatively short-ranged weapon, with a maximum reach of 535 meters and a minimum range of 21 meters. The team is made up of 4 soldiers. The mortar operator himself carries a pistol. The other 3 men are armed with rifles, and between them they carry 48 45mm HE bombs. There are 3 Brixias to a light mortar section, led by a 2-man section HQ team armed with rifles, 3 sections to a platoon, with a 2-man platoon HQ, and there are 2 platoons in the support company, for a total of 18 Brixias. Both the HMG and light mortar platoons of the support company are obviously much needed assets for the Italian Infantry Battalion, but at the same time, it almost feels like too little too late. In other forces, machine guns and light mortars have already been pushed down to company and even platoon level. In a similar vein, other critical supporting weapons found in American, British or German battalion support companies, weapons like medium mortars, light artillery, anti-tank guns, are conspicuously absent from the Italian Infantry Battalion. Instead, these are found at regimental level, again, 1 level higher than everybody else. So what we're really seeing with the Italian Infantry Battalion in Fortress Italy is an antiquated organisation. It really harkens back to pre-World War I style infantry units dominated by massed riflemen. World War I and then the interwar period saw the introduction of more specialised weapons, light machine guns, grenade launchers, semi-automatic rifles, anti-tank weapons, submachine guns, that all pushed increasing amounts of firepower down to the lowest level. Different countries followed this trend in different ways. We can see the difference between distributed massed semi-automatic rifles in the US Garand versus the concentrated firepower of the German MG34 and 42, and they follow the trend at different speeds. Witness the lacklustre fire of the British section compared to its US and German equivalents. But the Italians are noticeably behind the curve here. This is not an exercise in being slightly worse than everybody else, but still competitive if you're smart or if you put the effort in. There is not a single anti-tank weapon in the entire battalion. If the enemy brings armour to the fight, the Italian infantry have no organic means of dealing with it, bar attempts at close assault, which are generally not a good idea. There is not a single radio in the entire battalion. Even the battalion commander has no organic means of calling for fire or establishing and maintaining C2 links to attached units. The infantry squads not only have less firepower than their peers, but are too rigid and inflexible to disperse and limit the effects of enemy fire, making it very difficult to win firefights. In short, out of the box, the Italian Infantry Battalion from CMFI is going to be severely outmatched by its contemporaries. Of course, it's unlikely that players will be fighting with an unsupported battalion, attaching weapons at lower levels and backing the battalion up with other formations that can bring much needed anti-tank, mortar, light artillery and tank assets are a must. Unfortunately, these efforts are still not likely to bring the Italians up to the same level as their likely adversaries, who can also count on integration with other formations that are technically superior to their Italian equivalents on the island of Sicily. But, for all that, Italian infantry battalions are an interesting formation precisely because they are so outclassed. The simple fact that they are behind the curve in infantry organisation and equipment really highlights how important these elements are and how much of an impact on the battlefield they can have. So that's a once-over for the sadly terrible Italian Infantry Battalion in CMFI. Hope you all enjoyed this one and found it interesting. If you'd like to see these videos early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships, whether you do or not. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.